acoustics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, political scientist at North Kentucky University. With me today is my regular co-host, Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum, Jay Carson. Good morning, Jay. How you doing?
I am, keep thinking I should come up with, better than Bernie Sanders in a gulag or something. But Bernie Sanders better than Bernie Sanders in a Potemkin village. How about that?
Well, okay. I guess that's something. Sure, absolutely.
It works on a lot of levels.
I guess it does for you. If it works, then stick with it. I'm actually doing pretty well because it's always nice when I can sort of sit in the passenger seat and let you kind of drive the show. And so, so why don't we, if you're ready to take the wheel, why don't we just get at it?
Well, this is, I think, probably the big story for us that we will be reporting. And it's a little weird because it's almost like we're kind of late, but is, of course, the report of Special Counsel Robert Mueller was delivered to the Justice Department last Friday. Our programs are typically recorded Saturday mornings. So no real details were available until Sunday. At this point, what has happened is the Attorney General, Robert Barr, has presented conclusions from the report, sort of a summary, to Congress that's been released publicly. He will follow up by releasing a redacted version of the report in mid-April. Democrats are grouching that they would like to see it on Tuesday. But the Justice Department is pushing back on timelines for redacting information related to intelligence sources, grand jury information. You have to get court approval for that. But the big takeaway from the Mueller report, and Mike, the two words you've been waiting to say for so long, of course, no collusion. The special counsel found no evidence of collusion with Russia by the Trump campaign to hijack the election or anything inappropriate in the election. That's not to say that they didn't find plenty of evidence that the Russians, on their own, had participated in attempts to meddle in the U.S. election by planning, among other things, planning fake stories in social media and using fake bots to promote them. The other conclusion or non-conclusion of the report is the obstruction of justice issue, where Robert Mueller did not reach a conclusion. And supposedly, as is reported, he told Barr several weeks ago that he would not reach a conclusion, at which point the Justice Department has said that they don't believe there is any obstruction of justice to prosecute or follow up on. So there was a lot going on there, and again, it's weird because to summarize what's also happened in the last week. But this is the first thing I think we should do, Mike, is sort of take a self-congratulatory bow.
Yeah.
The reason for doing that is many of our listeners, the loyal listeners, have pushed for, why aren't we talking about the Trump investigation more? Why aren't we talking about the Mueller report more? Why aren't we dealing with these issues? And our response has always been, we don't want to traffic in sort of rumor or innuendo and so forth. We want to, when there's an actual news report document, something to talk about, actual findings, that's the time to talk about it. So, Mike, I would say we performed better than many of our peers in the media. Again, they're under different pressures than what we are.
Certainly.
One, they have to actually try to make money.
Yeah. There's that. Yeah.
And report things, more often than once a week. But no, I think that one of the topics I wanted to talk about was sort of how the media ends up looking at the end of this as the report now comes out. When there were so many sort of breathless narratives of treason and so forth. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Now, I would point out some of the more egregious examples. I mean, Time Magazine had a cover showing the White House morphing into the Kremlin. there were again reported the original BuzzFeed leaking of the dossier, which apparently led to most all of those allegations of collusion and treason and so forth. Well, I could go on, but again, my sense is that, and I'll jump in before you, Mike, because you said I can drive today.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, but I think the more sober news outlets performed better and look better in retrospect. And I think that there's also something to be said that at least at this point, this is something that's hard to see down the line, but there's, I think, some institutional trust that has been formed now in that, look, the Mueller was certainly not a Trump fan. The staff, there were 50-some attorneys, many of whom were also not Trump fans, or at least registered Democrats, had been associated with Democrat politics before. And they came back with a report. And again, we haven't seen the entire report yet, but where it's a sort of bit by bit, 400 pages. They interviewed 500 some witnesses, I believe, and came up saying that they could find no evidence. So that ought to be in one respect sort of reassuring. So I guess less reassuring is how some press outlets reacted to it. But Mike, I want to get your take. So.
Well, I start with I disagree with your characterization of the findings, and I'm basing this on the letter that Attorney General Barr released, which in fact included, we don't have the report as you pointed out, but we do have certain quotes from the report that Barr put in the letter, and it's a short letter, it's 4 pages, easy to read. A couple of the quotes I think are pretty important. Number one, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. So now that's not, though, no collusion. And in fact, the Attorney General,
that's not no
let me
collusion,
finish, okay? Let me finish. The Attorney General especially highlights another part of the report, saying that the special counsel states that while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. So there's a big difference between saying no collusion, no evidence, and in fact, I'm not just blaming you. Even some of the awful fake news media have just kind of gone to that shorthand. But no collusion is not the conclusion. The conclusion, based on all that we know right now, which is just the Attorney General's report, is there was not enough evidence to establish collusion. And right. So that's very different. And I don't think that the Attorney General, who certainly is, a fan of executive power and Donald Trump's pick, would have specifically put that second quote in there if he didn't want to emphasize that point. And so I think a lot of the reporting on the report has been disappointing, and it goes to, I think, the media just wanting a black or white, innocent or guilty kind of verdict. And it's pretty clear to me that even though we haven't seen the Mueller report, that it's a lot of shades of gray.
Well, I guess, yeah, that they want a black or white, innocent or guilty. But to some extent, the way our system works is you're either going to be charged or not charged.
Yeah, but this is a different thing because it's not a criminal. I mean, there was no question that the president would be indicted. So this is the question of, would there be, the real question here, as I always thought it was, would be, right. Would there be enough evidence of collusion to move forward with impeachment? And clearly,
it would
there's
raise
not.
To the level of an impeachable offense.
And certainly there's not. But so saying no collusion that's not supported by what we know of the Mueller report. But certainly saying not enough collusion to rise to a legal standard of go ahead and prosecute it. Yeah,
let's go back through this. I mean, because again, as you point out, it's one, there's no new indictments.
Right.
Two, although I think the conventional wisdom is you can't indict a sitting president. I suppose there's some dispute over that. But the the conclusion that, look, after all of these resources have been spent, um, and they were not able to find this, again, conspiracy, which is what launched this, right? Um, Now, to say that he's been exonerated, that's a different thing, because again, that was not Mueller's job, and never was. Um, we don't hire special prosecutors to prove people are innocent.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, my sense is, if you want to quibble if it's no collusion, I still think, the saying that we threw all the resources of the FBI, the intelligence community, 2 years, unlimited budget. The Justice Department also significantly certified that it did nothing, whatsoever to curtail or clip Mueller's wings. He had all the resources he needed. They did nothing to try to hinder the investigation, and Mueller seems to acknowledge that.
And let me be clear, Jay, on this, that I am not saying that President Trump is guilty in any sense, or should be indicted or impeached or anything like that. As far as I'm concerned, based on what I know, is that this particular Trump investigation is over, and it seems to me that there is clearly not enough evidence to take it to any other level, and so we just kind of need to put this investigation behind us, despite what we might think. No matter what I might think about Trump and collusion or anyone else, is that there's just not enough to go forward with it, especially given the fact that going forward with it would mean basically challenging the results of a democratic election. Sure. And so to me, that standard always had to be pretty high. It seems clear, given, with this thorough investigation, it did not come close to getting to that standard of proof. And so I'm fine with saying, okay, that's that, even though I'm certainly not.
But you can't bring yourself to say those two words,
because they're not. I mean, I don't see that there's proof of that.
All right. I mean, I'm comfortable in asserting that the Loch Ness monster doesn't exist.
That's a bad analogy, because it certainly seems
not a bad analogy.
No, I think it is, but because it's not like a ridiculous and fanciful kind of bizarre sort of thing. There's, I guess maybe
let's back up just a little bit, though, because that's actually something I wanted to mention. Let's consider the basis of this claim started out that the President of the United States was actually a secret agent for the Russians.
Well, some people said that, but now, come on, I don't think that was the standard narrative. The standard narrative was more like the president, or Donald Trump, before he was president of the United States, was willing and able to work with the Russians to defeat Hillary Clinton. Not that he was a secret agent.
Willing to work with Hillary Clinton to
with the Russians.
With the Russians.
Yeah, he was much more willing to work with the Russians than Hillary Clinton. Come on now.
Right, exactly. He's got some standards. But no, I mean, you don't find that narrative in itself to be striking. And as we said, when this story first broke with the dossier, it was over 2 years ago. I mean, I remember I said, look, if this is true, then yes, it is treason, and this is probably the biggest story in American history. And I think you responded quite thoughtfully with the Carl Sagan quote that big claims require big
Absolutely.
proof.
Yeah, and I think there's not nearly enough proof that the President Trump, or Donald Trump, and before that was or is a Russian agent, certainly. And I always thought that was a Loch Ness monster-y type of claim, certainly. But I thought much more likely was the claim that, he didn't see the problem of working with whoever could defeat Hillary Clinton, and Russia happened to be, or certain Russian individuals happened to be tied into that, and they were tied into the Russian government. I still think that's plausible, but clearly there hasn't been enough evidence to demonstrate that. And again, and I also think, Jay, that probably we're going to be able to have a better conversation about this in mid-April, when we have more than a 4-page summary, essentially.
Sure.
And I'm looking forward to that conversation.
All right. Well, we'll continue to wait till all the facts are in.
But But there was that second thing I thought that was really important that you mentioned. That I think got more of the attention this week, right? That why did Mueller just essentially punt on the obstruction of justice thing? And also related to that, given that, why did Barr and Rosenstein basically only need a couple of days to say, no, there's no obstruction here, right?
Well, I mean, I think the only reason they needed a couple of days is, look, if Mueller with all his resources can't find something that he believes rises to the level of obstruction of justice or can't reach a conclusion on that, then then the conclusion is to be reached is there's not enough evidence to move forward on it. And so
yeah, and I agree with you on that. I know a lot of folks on the left had a problem with that. Why did they reach that decision so quickly? But that was exactly what I thought as well. If Mueller's team did all that work and summarized it, they could certainly read the summary. And also, given the fact that I think that they're going to be just not given their allegiance to Trump, but given their views of executive power and kind of related issues, I think they would expect that to be a pretty high standard of proof. And there's also that issue of if there's no
crime, what are you obstructing?
But still, that's, from my understanding, that's not necessarily, because you can try to obstruct an investigation because you might not want other things that aren't the focus of the investigation to come out.
You're obstructing the investigation because you don't want them to find, you don't want the fact that your mistress is getting paid off or something like that. But that's not related to the original crime. Yeah, that would still be obstruction of justice.
But that's pretty tough. As I think a lot of folks pointed out, is a lot of the obstruction stuff, especially with the president, came
down to firing Comey.
Well, yeah, and that too. And you have to look at, what can the president do in his role as president? How do you separate that out from, is he doing that just because he sees that as the best thing to do in his legitimate role as president? And how do you get into the president's head and understand, if he's actually doing this to obstruct or doing this just in the execution of his duties as president? And that's a pretty tough call.
And then there's the other question of does it matter?
How so? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, matter? I think I think the received sort of popular wisdom on this, and it's, hasn't necessarily really been tested in court, is that, look, the president has absolute constitutional power to discharge inferior officers.
Right. Yeah.
When he runs afoul of that, the idea would be, if he were to fire Mueller or fire Comey, I'm sorry, because, well, I want to protect, say Gates or something like that. Well, that wouldn't necessarily be, wouldn't be obstruction of justice, because, look, he's the head of the U.S. law enforcement, and it's a sort of prosecutorial discretion.
Well, yes and no. I mean,
if he's investigating Trump himself, I think that's something different.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Gotcha.
And again, that's more close to the Watergate parallel.
Yeah.
Right, where Nixon essentially told the Justice Department, stop investigating me.
Right.
Now, that never rose to the level of, actually having a court hearing, finding, and so forth like that. And again, we're dealing in that sort of more amorphous, impeachable offense area, as opposed to a crime that you actually prosecute.
Yeah, I think you're right. When it gets into the sort of stop investigating this guy because maybe he might have some dirt he could spill on me, but making those kind of secondary and tertiary connections can be really difficult, which I think is just kind of goes to why it's so difficult in this particular instance to demonstrate kind of clear intent to obstruct justice.
Yeah. So let's bounce more to the politics of this. Regardless of whether you will say no collusion, Trump certainly is, and is sort of taking a victory lap on this. The Democrats, on the other hand, are there's a little bit of a fissure there, in that there are some that now want to pivot more to policy issues, and there are some who are still manning the barricades. Particularly, I'm thinking of Congressman Adam Schiff, Congressman Sewell of California, who took to the television airwaves last week to insist that the dossier is in fact true, has not been disproven. And Representative from Minnesota, who introduced an impeachment resolution. So what are your thoughts as far as where Democrats go moving forward now? Will they pivot to policy, or are they going to be able to, not control this wing that still is sort of impeachment or bust?
But before we get to that, Jay, there was one thing that I wanted to ask you about the actual investigation itself that we didn't get to before we move into that. Is, one of the other questions that I wanted to raise about the investigation itself, and a concern that some people, especially on the left, had, is the fact that Mueller never actually subpoenaed Trump, and they never actually got personal testimony from him, and certainly his attorneys were trying very hard to not make that happen. Now, my understanding on this, and I just wanted to get your take, is that essentially in cases where you're asking, there's not a legal precedent on this, whether or not the special counsel can subpoena a president. Now, Ken Starr did subpoena Clinton, but then Clinton agreed to talk, and so Starr withdrew the subpoena, and so it's never been taken into the courts. And my sense of things is that the Mueller team wasn't sure if they could win on the merits, and the Trump attorneys were also really good about essentially flooding Mueller with information to basically shut down the need for his testimony. Because my understanding is,
or you might say complying with his requests, but
I think the standard is that the only way the court would probably be okay with the subpoena is if there was no other way that the special counsel could get the information that they needed to get, and the Trump team wanted to make sure that any of those questions could be answered by something other than Donald Trump getting in a room with some investigators where he could. There's certainly I would say,
which is a good call.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But is that kind of, does that take on it seem about right to you?
Yeah, no, I think the closest legal precedent is the Nixon tape.
Right.
And in that case, it's a little different because it was, there was a subpoena for, what essentially documents or items over which the president claimed executive privilege.
Yeah.
And with the Supreme Court said, yeah, executive privilege exists, but it doesn't go this far. And many said that was actually the bigger turning point in Watergate, the release of the tapes, which, didn't necessarily go to Watergate, but just made Nixon out to look very much like a bore.
Yeah.
And even more unlikable than he had been before. So that's the closest thing. Now, again, if there's a showdown between a sitting president and a special counsel, yeah, I think you're right. There's sort of an interest on all sides in avoiding that.
Yeah.
Just because of the optics of it. No one comes out looking good. It's probably not good for the country. It's probably not good for the Constitution. So, I think it's sort of all like responsible grown-up parties work together to avoid that, and I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Does the special counsel have power to subpoena a president? Yeah, I think he probably does, subject to the limits of executive privilege. But again, those limits haven't really been tested, at least not in close to 45 years.
Yeah. So I just wanted to get your view on that. It sounds like that we're pretty much in the concert on that. So on the other thing that you asked about, the politics of it, certainly there are a few voices still on the left who are calling for impeachment. For the most part, the Democratic Party has dropped that and is moving on to policy, and I think that's a smart thing. Now, that's not to say that there still aren't any legitimate grounds for investigating President Trump and the Trump Association, the Trump Organization and all that. There are still a number of ongoing actions with Trump associates that are related to those. I think it was 34 indictments that the Mueller invested in. There's still a grand jury that's impaneled that's still doing some work. There's this mysterious foreign government that hasn't, or foreign corporation that hasn't complied, and I believe is being now fined like $50,000 a day or something like that. I don't know. And there's still like other things like the Trump tax return thing. So I think there are still other legitimate grounds. There's plenty of corruption in the Trump world to investigate, certainly. But the Russia corruption thing, or collusion thing, as far as I'm concerned, I think as far as the Democratic leadership in Congress is concerned, and most of the membership, is that's a battle that they're interested in pivoting away from, and I think for good reason.
Yeah, well, I would think so too. I mean, that would be my instinct. But if I knew how AOC and Adam Schiff and some of these people thought, I mean, I just don't. But I mean, to some extent, though, isn't there a danger of we're going to continue to investigate, but to what end?
Well, I think it's
right, because you sort of give everybody riled up. We're going to find out all this stuff, and I suppose, look, it's always good, campaign fodder that Trump had sleazy business dealings and so forth. But that would come as no surprise to anyone.
Right, but I think that it does matter when it comes to like issues of are there violations of the Emoluments Clause? Things like there are still issues about his inauguration.
And I guess that's my question. So if there are violations of the Emoluments Clause, what you going to do about it?
Well, I'm not sure. It depends what level they rise.
I don't mean you. I'm speaking sort of colloquially.
I mean, it depends on what level those things rise to, because I think the only remedy in that sense is a political remedy, right? And my feeling is that nothing is, and I've said this, I think, Jay, from the beginning, is I didn't think there was going to be anything that would rise to the level of an impeachable offense, and I had some, serious issues with that sort of that focus. But I do think it's important to, hold the president up to a very high standard in all of his dealings, and so I think that Congress is rightly exercising its investigatory and oversight role. And, I certainly want to see the president's tax returns, and I certainly want to see the results of these other investigations that are on different things. And so I think that actually, both in terms of, you could say, ethically, morally, and politically, it's a good idea, so long as you're not just kind of beating the same kind of dead horse of the Russia thing. To me, that particular thing's over. But there's, again, I think, so much corruption surrounding Donald Trump that you can profitably and rightly investigate many, many other things. And in fact, those investigations are going on both at the congressional level, the state level. There's a lot.
17 of them, as you counted last time.
Yeah, so that,
or maybe we're down to 16 now.
Yeah, I guess we would be
if
now.
We're saying Mueller's over.
But I think, Jay, that the key point to take away from all of this, and certainly the key point I took away from all of this, is we got it right from the beginning. I think we really need to emphasize.
Right. Keep your powder dry.
Absolutely.
So I guess moving on, in something that is non-Mueller but more policy related, the Trump administration also pivoted a little bit in terms of its approach to the Affordable Care Act. There have been a federal Justice Department backed suit moving forward to invalidate certain portions of the ACA. Last week, President Trump announced, and the Justice Department replied, that they would be expanding their request to essentially knock out the entire ACA. As you recall, the idea was that it was constitutional because the penalties imposed for not getting insurance were a tax, and that lies within Congress's taxing power. Since that piece went away, the question is, under what authority does Congress now have to require these policies and the rest of the ACA? And then the next question after that is sort of what's called the severability question, is, look, if parts of it are unconstitutional, does that mean the whole thing falls, or just the unconstitutional parts are stricken?
Yeah. And
this is causing some concern to Republican Congress people who, look, healthcare was, and I would posit, and I think you would probably agree with me, that the numbers show the results of last year's election were probably more about healthcare issues than Trump resistance. I mean, at least that's.
I'd say that healthcare was a big part, certainly. So yeah, absolutely.
And to some extent, obviously, the two sort of go hand in hand. Yeah. But I think most voters from the polls that I have seen, exit polls, said their biggest concern was healthcare. It wasn't necessarily countering Donald Trump. So this is a bit of a gambit by the White House to push this, and it puts pressure on Republicans in the Senate to come up with a replacement health care proposal, which Trump has called upon them to do. Now, they weren't able to come up with something last time. Perhaps this may concentrate the mind a little bit more. But what are your thoughts on again the politics
yeah,
of it and the pivot sort of to
on,
the more expansive?
on the politics of it, it seems like Donald Trump just cannot help stepping on his own. Well, anyway, he can't take a victory lap on the,
Right, exactly, yeah.
but
Couldn't you have waited a week?
exactly. Well, I think a couple of things strike me about this. Number one, obviously, as you know, Jay, that typically the administration's role when the federal law is challenged is to the extent that they possibly can, is to defend those laws.
Correct.
And when the federal judge's ruling came out, Judge O'Connor, I believe it was, Reed O'Connor, when that ruling came out, you talked a lot about the severability issue, and that's also, generally speaking, the default position is to try to save as much of the law as you possibly can. And a lot of legal
Exactly. The legal presumption is one, acts are constitutional.
Yeah.
And to the extent they're not constitutional, what is should be preserved.
Yeah.
Unless it is somehow so intertwined that the one cannot stand without the other.
Yeah. And so I think there are two issues here. The first is, the ruling about the individual mandate, right? And that's essentially the logic of the ruling, saying that, well, since in 2017, when Congress passed the tax reform bill, they zeroed out the penalties for that, then now all of a sudden the authority for Congress to do this, to impose this mandate under its taxation power, goes away because there's no tax penalty. Now, I would say that that's questionable reasoning, because I would say that, well, the basis for the first Supreme Court ruling was that Congress was forcing people to do something, and that while they couldn't force them by imposing a fine, they could force them by using the tax code to sort of incentivize them to do that. But now it's no longer the case that people are being forced to do anything, because a mandate without a penalty isn't a mandate. It's Congress giving people a choice. So I would argue that the whole nature of it is different. Now that's a disputable claim, and I think there's a reasonable argument to be made, maybe on the other side, even though I don't think it's as strong. But this idea of, well, the whole thing must fall. I mean, the very fact that Congress, when they passed this tax reform, decided to not take out the rest of Obamacare, pretty strongly signals congressional intent. And so I think really that the Trump administration here is siding with pretty significant judicial activism on the part of Judge O'Connor. And I think that's one of the reasons why a number of Republicans, and I would guess probably you to a certain extent, are concerned about that, because it's a big problem, I think.
I'm not terribly concerned in that. Let's put the Republicans who are concerned are Republicans who are in swing districts, right? Closer districts.
Sure.
Your more conservative Tea Party and Freedom Caucus House seats, I think, see this as very much as a good thing. Legally speaking, I would tend to agree. I think it's a sort of a tough stretch to say, okay, well, yes, part of this, it would be unconstitutional, but clearly, whether I agree with it or not, a decision to expand Medicaid is within Congress's power. I mean, assuming, per the Sebelius ruling, it's not requiring states to expand Medicaid, but it's offering, states and allowing and incentivizing states to expand Medicaid. I think that piece can probably stand without the rest of it. But it remains to be seen how those arguments get made. I mean, you could maybe, make the argument that because you're moving different pieces of money from different places and you're relying on the exchanges to pick up this many people, that, the Medicaid expansion won't work. I mean, that's anticipate that the argument would be. But as far as just laying down a marker, and politics-wise, I don't think it's a bad move. I mean, I think it probably loses in court. But at the same time, Trump can say, I pushed to have this entire thing wiped out, and I asked Congress to start over. I'm doing what I said I'd do. So I mean, to some extent, I think there's a little safety in that. I don't think the administration believes that any
Yeah.
court would actually take that step and strike down the entire statute.
I think maybe I could see it from, because Donald Trump, it seems like, sees everything just from the viewpoint of Donald Trump. And so from that particular perspective, maybe it makes a certain sense, but certainly from the perspective of congressional Republicans, it's not a very good move, which I think
Right.
is,
It's why, yeah, a lot of people in swing districts. Why do I need this headache of having to? Now, I think there also you could argue that, look, those representatives would have this headache anyway.
well,
And I think that's sort of a very Trumpian thing of, look, you're going to get blamed and you're going to get attacked for pushing grandma off the cliff and leaving people to starve and die in the streets and all that sort of thing. Anyway,
but it puts them in a tough position, because now they have to answer the question of, well, the Trump administration essentially wants to kill all this, including, all the millions of people who've gotten coverage under Medicaid expansion. How do you feel about that? That's a president who cares about his party doesn't
Sure.
put, and there was no reason to do it either, because it's not like I don't think it's going to make a material difference in the court rulings, really. And so it was staking out a marker that's going to have nothing but negative consequences if you care about conservative policy being enacted. And so again, I just think it's Trump's selfishness and short-sightedness hurting more than anything his own party. So I was happy to see it. Of course, I think it's a great move. But I would say that if I were a conservative, and I would think, my God, why can't this man just stop, shooting himself in the foot, basically, or shooting us in the foot?
Again, to me, it comes. There's sort of the coordination question of, and again, why, again, it's a little weird because I tend to look at things with a couple different lenses. And sometimes I look at it through my lawyer lens. Sometimes I look at it through my, I don't know, philosopher king. Wouldn't this be the best? You know what I mean? Sort of stepping back of, wouldn't this be the best public policy? And then sometimes I look at things as the on the ground politics. And looking through the on the ground politics, my thought is, why? Because here's the thing. Here's why Trump lost a little bit, is that you and I are talking about this today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, not that what you and I talk about adds up to a hill of beans here, but other media outlets, which more people listen to, are also talking about it, as opposed to just running the replay of Trump spiking the ball and sort of on the Mueller report. It's sort of, he had a week lined up of really great press. Yep. and just other fun stuff like Avenatti getting charged and arrested. And I mean, he just had the trade deficit shrunk, and he had, there was just this parade of really great Trump news, and all he had to do is just get out of the way of the parade.
Well, yeah, and I totally agree.
And that's frustrating from the political standpoint.
It's like he's the anti Mitch McConnell, and I know
it's like he was sick of winning.
Yeah. Well, at some point, I think maybe at some point we'll need to talk about, or maybe we'll talk about the Green New Deal vote that happened this week. But that occurred to me kind of in context of this, because Mitch McConnell, for all, you know how I feel about Mitch McConnell. But Mitch McConnell understands the importance of protecting his people, and so much of what he does is focused on protecting his people from being in bad situations, from making bad votes. I mean, Nancy Pelosi does the same thing. That is a totally foreign concept to Donald Trump, and that's what I think. That's what I think makes him far less effective. One of the many things that makes him far less effective as a president than a lot of other conservatives who could have been in that office right now. And so that's why I think ultimately the Trump years are going to be seen as a big loss for conservatives, because they had this opportunity running against a pretty weak Democratic candidate, and they ended up electing this guy who just doesn't understand how to do politics, because for all his vaunted abilities as a deal maker, he clearly has very low skills in that area.
Well, I disagree and say low skills in politics. I think he understands how to do politics for himself.
Yeah, for himself, exactly. But
I think he may not see the bigger.
Okay, so his policy skills are, I would say, his ability to get policy through, which I think people sometimes forget, we focus so much on the horse race and who this is a win for and who this is a lose for. But in the end, it's about passing policies that help the American people. And that's not just rhetoric. And for a lot of members of Congress, it isn't just rhetoric. And so it's deeply frustrating that when you have a president who doesn't understand how to make that work, and Donald Trump doesn't.
So, all right, we can pivot real quick. We have one other story.
But before we get to that story, Jay, I wanted to say,
thank some people.
Yeah, it was last week was our biggest week in a while for new supporters. And Trey and Ken, I think they always do a great job. They did the show last week, but I thought they did a particularly good job last week. I really enjoyed their show, and maybe they deserve a certain amount of the credit for that. So, Trey and Ken, thank you. But
thank you, Ken.
Yeah, this last week we had, new monthly supporters on Patreon: Alex, Stan, Jason, and Amanda. All new supporters. And Amanda wrote in to say, I'm a proud new supporter on Patreon. I've been listening to the podcast since the beginning, and now is the time to support the show. My father, a Republican, my mother, a Democrat, and myself, a Libertarian, led to a childhood and adulthood filled with channel flipping from CNN to Fox News and back. Thank you for a wonderful podcast where both sides on the debate can be heard without that daily dose of talking heads and radical politics that dominate mainstream media. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, that's really nice. And also, I should mention that our longtime supporter on Patreon, Eric, significantly increased his monthly pledge of support this month. And finally, we had Georgios who pledged support on PayPal, actually, which is something you can also do. So thanks so much, folks. We really do appreciate it. Also, I want to mention that a little while ago, Jay, you might remember I mentioned I was writing a paper on political podcasts. And in fact, next week, I'm going to be presenting that at a political science conference. And
where you going?
Chicago, actually. So
okay.
To be, I love Chicago. It's like New York, but less stressful, in some ways. So my favorite big city, probably. But anyway, as part of that project, I compiled a list of active podcasts that are either hosted by political scientists or that feature political scientists on every or almost every episode. And I actually learned about a ton of great podcasts. And if you're interested, go to politicsguys.com. I have a whole list of them now. I'm going to keep that updated. And it's under the menu item Political Science Podcast. So you can check that out. And for anyone who's interested in the full paper, which isn't that long, and I don't do political science jargon or anything like that, I posted it on our Patreon site, and it's available to supporters at any level. And if you want to support us, check that out and all the other stuff we have there. It's patreon.com/politicsguys. And of course, we really would appreciate it. Thank you so much, folks. So, Jay, you said we have one more story, right?
Well, I think so, if we have time.
Yeah,
this also goes to
since it's related
healthcare
too,
and Medicaid
exactly.
expansion. And that is last week, federal district court judge James Brasberg.
Blasberg, Jimmy.
Blasberg, from the federal district court in D.C., struck down the waiver, essentially, of work requirements for Arkansas and also Arkansas and your home state of Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
The Arkansas, I think, or Oklahoma.
No, it's Arkansas. Arkansas and Kentucky.
Arkansas.
Yep.
Yeah, Arkansas. The Arkansas had been in effect for several months now. Kentucky's work requirements were set to go into effect next week, and he struck them down on the basis that, and I'll respectfully disagree with the judge, and the dubious sort of basis that I think that he said Medicaid ought to be getting money to as many people as possible, and this sets up a barrier and makes it difficult, and therefore it is not in the spirit of the law. So therefore, these changes are impermissible. Now, it's fully expected that this will be appealed, and I think, quite honestly, the Department of HHS has the better legal hand in this one. The judge's opinion, looked at a lot of the issues that he highlighted, mostly had to do with reporting. That say someone in Arkansas who would have to report, and the requirement there was 80 hours a month of work or somewhat equivalent work job training. And you were supposed to do this online, and there was a question of people having internet access and so forth. To me, I think this is sort of an overstep. The way this works is that is that the Medicaid program and states can seek waivers from the department to do their own sort of creative things to make the program more efficient. And work requirements are a popular one, and I think not an unreasonable one. And I think there's a lot of good um, research to show that getting people back into work is probably better for their health in the long run. Now, this, of course, these requirements apply only to able-bodied persons and under the age of 65. So, Mike, what are your thoughts here?
Well, I mean, on the politics of it, it seems like a lot of states are doing this because they want to take advantage of the Medicaid expansion, and I totally get that because it's helped out a lot of people, tens of millions of people, but they want to save money too. And so by designing, and most of the people who a number of studies have shown that most adults on Medicaid either work or are seeking work. And so
it doesn't apply to them. They're going to
Well, no, it applies to them because they'd
have to report
exactly the reporting requirements end up knocking a lot of people off, depending on how they're designed, basically. And it seems like there's an argument to be made that a lot of these states are doing that because they want to make the expansion more affordable, and if they can knock some people off, they kind of get some expansion, but they make it a little more affordable and that sort of thing. So, but to me, I agree that it's overreach, but I think it's overreach by the executive branch. Essentially, waivers are only acceptable when they improve the program. That's making it more efficient, making it more effective, that sort of thing. And no, the idea that work requirements might be a good thing, I certainly don't have any problem with that. But the executive branch doesn't get to change the law through waiver approvals. Congress legislates, and if it wants to require a work requirement in Medicaid or give the states the option of including one, it can absolutely pass legislation to that effect and, hey, go to it and try to get it through the legislative system. But the executive branch doesn't get to change a law that it doesn't like affected by executive action, whether that's waivers that don't really relate to the primary mission or, say, a President Obama going ahead and saying, you know what, I'm going to call this prosecutorial discretion and not try to deport anyone or get anyone
entire
else.
Class.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is a very correct ruling, and it's sort of saying that, hey, Congress legislates, and you don't get to write the laws and make the laws what you want them to be. I think it's a correct ruling, and I think it's a good step, and I hope it will be upheld on appeal.
Yeah, no, I think, to use your phrase, you're wrong. The Medicaid Act, allows states some flexibility. There's some flexibility that's supposed to be built in there. And
but flexibility to do what, Jay? I guess that's what
flexibility to improve the program. Now that looks at in Judge Blasberg's view, improving the program means having as many people as possible on Medicaid receiving as much money as possible. But he doesn't necessarily equate how the work requirements make people more or less healthy. And in some ways, listen, if you can have someone on Medicaid who is incentivized to work, get another job where they have private paying insurance, which is going to be better than Medicaid, you've done some wonderful things. You've taken someone off the Medicaid rolls, you've put them on to private insurance. They're getting better coverage. They're working. They're generating income. They're paying taxes, and you've lowered the burden on the taxpayers. So I think isn't that sort of the goal? And to use Reagan's formulation from years ago, our measure of charity shouldn't be how many people are on public assistance, but how many people come off it.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable point to make. But I think in part of the judge's ruling, he said that these waivers or these programs were arbitrary and capricious, and that's, of course, that comes up a lot because it's a technical.
Those are the magic words for knocking out a regulatory action.
Because and what that suggests to me is I don't necessarily disagree with your reasoning. In fact, at the most basic level, of course, we want as few people as possible on public assistance and getting these benefits and being part of the workforce and all that sort of stuff. Absolutely. But I think if the states can make a better and clearer case that this, in fact, is, that this isn't some kind of a theoretical connection, then maybe. But I think part of his opinion was that they really didn't make enough of an argument along those lines. And maybe if they make more of one, then that gets by. So I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I agree, in fact, that we should want as few people on Medicaid as possible. But also, I think you would agree that Medicaid programs shouldn't be designed to make it hard for people to report and therefore kick them out of the program and save money.
Sure. No, I think the reporting, to me, that's what this issue came down to, was the reporting system was flawed and was difficult, and could result in people improperly, people who were working, getting kicked off the rolls. I mean, the idea is to prevent people from, just not working and accepting benefits. But to the extent that this would knock people out who were working, but just were unable to, or whatever, for whatever reason, couldn't report. No, I think that's the better argument, and the way to fix that is to come up with a better reporting system.
Yeah, and see, I agree with you on that. If there's a reporting system that doesn't impose any kind of a significant burden on people, then this is where I probably part company with some on the left, because I think it's a not unreasonable argument that having employment and so forth has these benefits secondary to health and so forth. So, okay, I think that's maybe borderline acceptable, and a lot depends on the reporting requirements. But my sense of things is that in too many instances, this has kind of been pushed as, well, we're going to try to knock as many people off the rolls and make these things difficult, and that certainly is not what we want.
I would counter. I think the reporting requirements in this case are, I mean, again, this is almost my voting argument, are perhaps a little too lax in the way they're reported, because I think it would allow a lot of people. I mean, because all you'd have to do, is my understanding from the Arkansas and Kentucky programs, is sort of log on to this website and ask, are you working? You say, yep. See you next month.
And that seems simple to you and to me. No. I'm saying it invites. Does that really provide the incentive to go find a job? No, I suppose it provides the incentive to go log on and say that you have a job. Yeah, I think the problem.
But I think a better, more robust reporting system that got reports from employers or workforce agencies or those kind of folks would make a lot more sense for everybody.
Yeah, well, and I think that's at least a more reasonable argument. Now, to me, I feel like Medicaid has always been kind of the poor sister to Medicare, and Medicare is seen as, well, this is this entitlement type of program, and this is my right. But there's a stigma always attached to Medicaid, and I feel like none of this should be there, and that Medicaid should be seen as, in fact, just as much of an entitlement as Medicare, and we need to take this stigma off of it. But that's certainly a separate kind of more theoretical.
But you just said you wanted fewer people to be on Medicaid.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly that's my goal, but I don't think there should be a stigma attached to it. And by making it, there's no stigma attached to Medicare, right? Because it's just seen as a natural entitlement sort of thing. And I think it's really unfortunate. Well, there are just these poor people who can't handle their own lives and so forth, so they have to take this public assistance. No one really feels that way about Medicare. And I feel like, just as a matter of, you call it human dignity, what have you, that all of our social safety net programs should be seen in that light. And that's why, on that kind of basic level, I have a problem with all of these various means testing things, because I believe they have that effect. And so that's just a more kind of general concern of mine.
All right. I mean, but Medicare is by its nature means tested, right? I mean, it's available to
age.
This percentage of poverty in your income.
So is Medicaid, because it's an income thing.
Or I'm sorry, not Medicaid. That's what I meant. Was in Medicare? Yeah, there's Medicare. You apply based on your age. It applies based on your age, but then there's also sliding scales after that.
Yeah. All right. Well,
with that, so I get to wrap it up because I was driving.
Yeah, go right ahead, man.
So yeah, with that, I think we'll say goodbye for now, and please join us on the after show. where we will be talking about the Democrat New Deal vote
Ooh, yeah.
and Jesse Smollett's surprising, I
Yeah.
don't know what you want to call it,
I don't know.
exoneration?
Yeah, well, it's
Not
a kind of
exoneration?
ongoing sort of thing, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pretty interesting case, I think. So, yeah, I'm eager to talk about that for sure.
So thank you very much, and we will see you next week.
And hey, just before I forget, Jay, if you want to get in touch with us, you know how to do it.
Oh, yeah.
mail@politicsguys.com. We'd love to hear from you with your thoughts, concerns, complaints, whatever, just general,
We don't really want the.
well, yeah, philosophies of the world. I don't know, whatever. But, and also there's the Facebook group, facebook.com/politicsguys page. And we're also on Twitter at Politics Guys. And finally, the executive producers of Politics Guys are me, Michael Baranowski, you, Jay Carson, Bruce Johnson, Lil Moreno, and Benji Fishman. Today's show produced by both of us, Jay and Mike, and we will, in fact, be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you join us.